It's taken me 15 years for me to wrap my mind around what actually happened because it was so deeply traumatizing. And part of the reason why it was so traumatizing is because one of the reasons why spiritual abuse is unique in its potential for harm is it impacts the way we experience meaning, and it also impacts our identity.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Amma Thanasanti. I did it. I'm so proud of myself. It's such a beautiful name. And tell us real quick, because I love this. Tell us what your name means.
Amma means dear one, and Thanasanti means foundation of peace.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful. Well, let me read your bio real quick so everybody can know about you. And I am really excited. We had a great conversation before the recording started, and we completely switched gears on what we're going to talk about today. But I'm really excited about it. So, is a post-monastic meditation teacher, mentor, and coach who offers transformative approach to finding peace and freedom in our busy modern lives. With nearly 3 decades of experience as a Buddhist nun, Amma brings a unique blend of traditional teachings and contemporary understanding to her work. Amma extends an open invitation to pause, reflect, and discover the profound potential for awakening that exists in each moment. Whether you're a seasoned meditator or completely new to mindfulness practices, Amma creates a welcoming space for exploration and self-discovery. She emphasizes the importance of integrating spiritual practice into daily life, helping viewers find moments of stillness and clarity amidst the chaos of modern living. Yes, absolutely. And what we're going to talk about today is recovering from spiritual abuse. So, Amma, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited about our conversation, and I know you're ready to share.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the warm welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do we get started in this? I guess you want to start telling us kind of your journey, a little more detail, and then kind
So,
of what's been going on the last 15 years.
I started meditating when I was 17 years old. I wandered into a class taught by a man by Jack Engler at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And from that first week, literally, I knew with complete conviction that spiritual life was going to be the center of my life. And within a month of being in that class, I had a vision of being a nun. It was a particular kind of vision. It's the vision that comes during the daytime. It wasn't at night.
Mm-hmm.
It was while I was completely lucid, and it kept showing up until I ended up in the monastery 10 years later. So the grand master of the tradition that I came from, Ajahn Chah, is a remarkable meditation master in that he was exceptionally enlightened, wise, clear. But he, even though, hardly anybody lit a candle to his capacities, he would always reference the monastic discipline rather than his own personal attainments as the way to make decisions and to bring community harmony. So instead of elevating himself, he elevated what is known as the Vinaya, the monastic discipline. So between his clarity, his leadership, his charisma, his skill, his wisdom, his understanding, and his enlightenment, he was quite an exemplary teacher. So I went and met him. And even though by then his body was crumpled in a wheelchair and he wasn't speaking, I could sense the vast open spaciousness of his mind. And I also met Deepama, who was an amazing meditation master who never became a monastic. She only stayed as a householder and also had an extraordinary level of realization. And one of the characteristics of her was it was like being in this huge ocean of love.
Hmm.
So when I decided to go to the monasteries that I went to, I was filled with faith and it was like, I'm all set, like I'm all ready to give my life, and I'm completely committed. Like from the moment I arrived, I knew that's what I wanted to do, which is not common. It's not common that people show up with that kind of clarity and commitment. But we were faced with these kind of bizarre you know, archaic patriarchal structures and outdated things that didn't really make sense for us being modern women in the Western world. But I had the belief that because what I thought I was doing was going to be towards enlightenment and that that was a wholesome thing, then I was prepared to endure anything that came my way because the overarching thing that I was looking for, I thought was going to neutralize all the incongruities that I experienced. And so from early on, like, I was in the monastery a year, and, the teacher started shouting at the nuns, like not once or twice, but over a period of 3 months. And he did it at breakfast meetings and he did it at evening meetings, and nobody said anything. Like everyone was silent. It was just sort of expected. So I had this idea, well, this is part of what you have to accept. If you want to have these powerful teachings, you kind of have to live with this stuff. So one of our beloved sisters who was trying to figure out how to negotiate more ground and speak to the dilemmas that we were in came to the end of her rope and she left the community. And after that whole thing of being shouted out for 3 months continuously, 10 nuns left.
Wow.
And the teacher said, "Why is everyone leaving?"
The teacher that was yelling? He was asking that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And 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 over the 20 years that I lived in the monastery, I asked him 3 times about this situation, and all he ever said was, "I didn't know I was angry." So
Oh.
here you have a teacher who is exemplary in being able to speak about transcendent mind states. He could talk about the deathless. He could talk about it. The deathless is like profound freedom, something that is unshakable, something that is beyond time, something that is reliable, something that is unperturbable. He could talk about it in the same way you would describe the back of your hand. Like it was so accessible and familiar to him.
Mhm.
But there were all kinds of things, not only with him, but with the structure and with the patriarchy and with the hierarchy and with the
Mhm.
ways in which the men were senior, even if we'd been there longer, and the ways they had the decision-making power, the way they were the disciplinarians, the way they were the ones who gave the talks, and the impact of what it was living in a situation where we were not considered equal humans on this path.
Mhm.
And so, anyway, I stayed in the monastery a total of 20 years, and then I left after a whole series of very unfortunate events, and I came to the United States and continued as an independent monastic, and then had a higher ordination, and then eventually returned to civilian life.
Healing is hard, but healing alone is even harder. If you're craving connection with women who get it, the women's healing community is here for you. There's no judgment, only real conversations, healing tools, and a circle of support. Click below to sign up now.
It's taken me 15 years for me to wrap my mind around what actually happened because it was so deeply traumatizing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And part of the reason why it was so traumatizing is because one of the reasons why spiritual abuse is unique in its potential for harm is it impacts the way we experience meaning, and it
Mhm.
also impacts our identity.
Mhm.
And so because, the Dhamma, which is the truth of the way things are, it was the Buddha's teachings. It was both like what I had dedicated my life to, but it was also like what I wanted to be. And then the Vinaya, or the monastic discipline, was the code of conduct. And when that was used as a weapon against
Mm.
me, then something in me got completely dysregulated. because it's like, who am I if the thing that I'm committed to causes this much harm?
Mm-hmm.
So part of the 15 years was picking apart what was the distortion
Mm-hmm.
based on patriarchy, greed, and ill will, and the desire for power and dominance, and what was actually embedded in the
Yes.
original intent of the teachings and the
Mm-hmm.
Grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the trick, and this is very, very interesting, is that a real huge turning point for me happened when I started doing my own attachment repair work. Because up until that point, even though I too could speak about transcendent states, could understand and talk about how love was the essence of who we are, I could speak about, experiencing and tasting the deathless, that my fundamental place that I would return to was a place that there was something fundamentally wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so until I was able to shift that,
Mm-hmm.
then I couldn't actually see what was wrong with the system because I kept on somehow going back to the place that there was something wrong
With
with
me.
me.
Yep. That is so common among the religions. And I remember I was speaking with one of the leaders in my then church, and he was pretty high up, and I was counseling with him, and he said something really interesting because he said, the church has this belief that we're sinners and we're terrible and we're awful, we're bad people, and kind of beat us down. And he said, I don't drink that Kool-Aid. He says, I don't believe that. And I sat back and I'm like, wow, there's someone with common sense. Like, to sit here and berate ourselves all the time and and think that we're just these horrible people. How is that going to help us?
So there's layers of this. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of the layer is that, many people have a place inside of them where they feel insufficient or they feel bad or they feel wrong or they feel like they're not good enough or that they feel like they don't have the right to exist. So that psychological vulnerability, I think for many is present. But then when
Mm-hmm.
you have religious organizations, sometimes it becomes interwoven with the doctrine and sometimes it becomes interwoven with the publicity campaign.
Yes.
People they work with a person's vulnerability in order to get them to continue to be participating
Mm-hmm.
because that's how they keep people like committed to the practice and the process.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, it's deeply, deeply distorted. Okay. When there's like a monetary reason
Mm-hmm.
keeping people believing that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, because then they can get the answers that they need from the church or from the ceremonies or from whatever. That is distorted. What I was experiencing, it wasn't coming through the teachings like that. It was coming through the structure around which the teachings were held. So it wasn't that people were telling us that there was something fundamentally wrong with us. It was saying that in order for women to practice in the monastery, they have to accept that they're subordinate because that's what it says in the structure.
Oh.
And so we can't change the structure because the structure was given by the Buddha. And so you have to accept something that doesn't make any sense to you in order
Mm-hmm.
to have access to these teachings, which are liberating. So the crazy making thing is that you have to agree to something that you know is not helpful for you or for anybody else in order to do something which is ultimately liberating. And
There's
it
no win. There's no win
exactly.
for you. There's no win.
And so because I was so determined, I was committed that if I was able to understand the meditation and realize the level of enlightenment that I knew was available to me, that was going to neutralize the torque that we were experiencing in the structure
Mm-hmm.
enough to be able to make use out of it in a way so that only the good stuff would come through rather than the harm. But that's one of the problems and the downsides of somebody who's incredibly determined is that they don't necessarily track the harm that's happening to them through their
Mm-hmm.
determination.
It's true. It's true. In my case, it almost feels like it's part of the suffering that we're supposed to do, because that's what we're taught in church, is that we're to suffer, we're to suffer, we're to suffer. And you know what? I had a conversation recently with a friend and I said, you know what? There's suffering in life. I won't put myself in a suffering situation because I have suffered a lot over the years. And so this thing of putting yourself in a suffering situation like that is disturbing to me.
Well,
Sacrifice is different than suffering.
yeah, I mean, there's a distortion that's in the structure, and it's really hard to find ways to work with it because the people who have the power are not willing to look at the
Mhm.
impact that it's having and change it.
Mhm.
And so it ends up it's difficult. So, in my situation, when I first got there, I thought it was really an innovative community where they were doing a lot in order to help the nuns. And there were more nuns in that monastery than there were in any Buddhist monastery of that particular lineage around the world, Western
Wow.
world. And yet it didn't have a good result. And I am now 15 years having coming out of all of that, still, in the finishing touches of understanding what happened and why it was so confusing and why it was so harmful.
So, yeah. So, do you want to share what you did last night, or do we want to move on to sharing how you've worked through this? Because let me say this real quick. Before the recording started, I was sharing with you that I spent about close to 10 years deconstructing, trying to figure out. First of all, I didn't realize I was deconstructing, but I was trying to figure out what it is I wanted, like going to church, not going to church. What is it I wanted? It took me 10 years to figure out where I stood. And now I'm reconstructing my life. So I mean, where are you at?
So right now I feel like I've turned a corner, and the corner is that I have a clear understanding of what happened. And also I've turned a corner because this stuff is no longer like, phosphorus burning me to the core,
Yeah.
napalm that you can't wash off. I can talk about it and my nervous system doesn't get agitated. So I think, the question of like, how do you recover from this is a
Hmm.
profound question because it depends on where you are starting at from.
That's
So
true.
and so, and everyone needs to start exactly where they're at, you know? And so for the first many, many years, I was kind of like, partial zombie where I
Hmm.
wasn't able to do a lot. I was just trying to figure out what happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And then like with the few things that were in front of me that I could see that I needed, I would do that. So when I first left the monasteries, I was living in a small little vihara in Colorado Springs, right next to the Garden of the Gods. And I'm a nature person, and so nature for me has been a soothing support.
Hmm.
And so the Garden of the Gods, if you've never been there, is this massive rock formation. And these rocks are like 160 million years old. And I would go and I would press my body into these rocks. And, no matter how much like trembling or shaking or numbness I would experience, the rocks could hold me. And so my system would settle and then I would settle and I would relax. And then what would happen is that I would shift from being completely like absorbed into the trauma response to having more capacity to be aware of it. And then I would be able to just relax into the
Hmm.
awareness itself so that the disturbing feelings, emotions, or memories were coming up in a field of awareness rather than it being who I was.
Do you have unexplained tension, fatigue, or even gut issues that never seem to go away? Sometimes your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. Join our Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop, where we'll help you tune into your body and begin healing from the inside out.
Yes. So you were grounding yourself in that moment, is what you were doing.
Exactly. And I was
Hmm.
regulating my nervous system and I was using something that wouldn't shake. These rocks.
Hmm.
No matter how much disturbance I would bring to them, they never moved.
Hmm.
But even though they were just 10 minutes walk away, I couldn't be with them 24 hours a day. So what I did was I took some rocks, same rocks, and I kept them in my pocket. So for many years, like 8 years, I walked around with rocks in my pocket so that when stuff would emerge and I couldn't actually go run to the rocks, I could
Aw.
feel the rocks. And that would help remind me that there was something big enough that could hold me, that it wasn't far, that I might need to wait a little bit, but it was there when it was time for me to go. So that was the first layer. Then I started doing trauma work, which anytime you're in something like this, you need a trauma therapist because, and my trauma therapist said to me, first time I met her, she was aware I'd been meditating for decades at that point. And she said, even with somebody like you, the first thing that goes offline is your ability to observe. First thing. So that somebody who's a meditator and has a tremendous amount of internal resources, when you are in a trauma activation and you're outside of your window of tolerance, the very first thing that you lose capacity is the ability to actually track what is happening.
Ooh.
And so the reason why a trauma therapist is worth their weight in gold is because their job, like 100%, is to keep you in this magic zone where you're not so activated that you can't track,
Mm-hmm.
but you have access to some of the material that still has charge in it. And in that magic zone is the place where it can release safely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I worked with her for many years, and that was very helpful. And then also I have, my own practices with nature and my own
Mm-hmm.
ability to do journey and ceremony and things like that, which was helpful. And then I got really good at finding like what helps, like what helps.
Yeah. I'm always
Rock.
on the search for new stuff. Always.
So rocks help and nature helps and different kinds of energy medicine helps and what
Mm-hmm.
helps. So, and then I've had all kinds of health problems, which were both a manifestation.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I just want to make a comment. I love that you shared how important trauma therapy is because I'm always talking about that, not talk therapy. There's a place for that. We need trauma therapy because there are modalities that are going to help us work this stuff out of our body and mind.
That's right. And a trauma therapist, a general trauma therapist, is different than somebody who specializes in spiritual abuse.
Yeah, that's true.
That's something I've just recently learned, but that's another story.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's true, though. That's true.
so, there's been many things, but I think another really significant turning point for me was when I started. I mean, I was learning or knowing about attachment theory, and that was helpful as a
Mm-hmm.
conceptual framework because it gave me some like understanding about how it's possible for you to have a teacher like mine who was as realized as he was, could talk about these experiences that are rare. Most people don't have access to them and shout at you for 3 months. Like, how is it possible that you can have these things happening?
Yeah.
So attachment theory for me gave me a frame of reference that helped me have a understanding like why this is actually possible. So like I didn't feel like I was so crazy.
Right. Yeah. Seriously, it does. It kind of gives you that space between the behavior and you. It's like, exactly.
So it started to make a little bit more sense. So that was a chunk, that there's a framework that starts to make more sense. Then I started to do my own attachment repair work. And that was life-changing because just like my teacher, I had abilities to talk about these transcendent states, but I hadn't been able to shift that place inside of myself where I felt that something was fundamentally wrong or I was fundamentally bad.
Mm.
And so, as I was able to do practices, it's a particular set of teachings and practices that does that, so that that was no longer my baseline. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going back there.
Mm-hmm.
Then that helped me be able to differentiate that the problem wasn't fundamentally within me, it actually was within the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another big turning point.
I bet.
Yeah. And so I, in my own like part of my healing and part of my need and part of my gift to the world is I created an attachment repair program for meditators that helps do
Ooh.
this work so that as a meditator, you have support to do this work. It's not like you have to, it's within understanding we're all meditators. You have to be a meditator in order to be part of the program. But being able to offer this back into the world is like my drop of like contributing to the healing of like making it possible for the conditions for this to start to shift.
Mm-hmm.
And also for people who are in my situations like me, to give them support for more healing.
Because attachment styles, it's interesting you're saying that because I've had experts on that talk about attachment, different attachment styles, but we were talking about this is interesting. We would talk about it in a relationship, right? The attachment styles that happen there. But what's interesting is there can be attachment styles here too.
Well, attachment is within a person, and that will go with them wherever they are.
Yeah.
If
In
you're
any situation.
exactly. So even in a monastery where we were all celibate, we weren't in intimate relationships with each other. The attachment formation that we each had was present and active in how we were relating to each other,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the many layers of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So there
Yes.
was the patriarchy and the tendency for dominance and the tendency for hierarchy. There was narcissistic and attachment wounds. There was power over rather than presence with. There was, a charismatic leader who hadn't done some of this personal work. There was
Mm.
um, loyalty to a teacher over the monastic discipline, and all of these things together ended up with something that was remarkably unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And did a lot of damage.
Incredible damage.
Mm-hmm. So you also talk about somatic awareness as part of a healing tool that you use, correct?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that because that is been profound for me as well.
So as we pay attention to our body, we begin to notice things like, do I feel safe? Do I not feel safe? How tight am I? How relaxed am I? I have a tendency to clench my jaw
Mm-hmm.
and to clench my pelvic floor.
Mm-hmm.
And like I have to deliberately look at the tension and make an intention to relax it
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
it's so automatic that it clenches without me even being aware.
Yes.
So the more I'm able to be in places of relaxation, then what happens is that the charge of trauma, the unmetabolized charge of trauma, can surface when we are relaxed. Okay? When we're tight, it cannot surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we track what's going on and have more capacity to make sure that we feel safe, and as we feel safe, we have more capacity to relax. And as we relax, the defense mechanisms are not so strong. And so the stuff that is embedded in our systems can surface. And as they surface, they can start to release. And
Mm-hmm.
as they release, we're not carrying the same load.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting, and I've talked about this on my podcast. It's interesting how we carry this stuff in our body. And one of the things that my ex-husband used to say to me, he said like 2 or 3 times, he would call me and it was on my cell phone. My cell phone was literally sitting next to me and I would pick it up and he'd say, "Did you just run to the phone?" I said, "No." He goes, "You're breathing hard." And fast forward to today, when I look back on that, I walked around tense all the time. And so I also didn't breathe right. I was breathing very shallow. So of course it sounded like I just ran to the phone because I was breathing very shallow. And at what the result of me carrying that tension and stress, I was also very active. So I worked out, I was very active. I've torn up a lot of stuff in my body as a result. And so my body naturally wants to go to that tight state. And it's not as intense now, but I am always paying attention to it and catching moments where maybe my shoulders are up a little more or my posture isn't real great. I'm kind of leaning forward or just tight. Um, and then I stop, and I have breathing exercises that I do that immediately help me, but I'm sure
Well,
you've got some others.
I mean, each of us needs to have our own toolkit. And one of the ways that we can work with somatic awareness is with contrast. Notice the difference between when we feel tight and when we feel relaxed.
Yes.
Notice the difference when we're breathing deep and when we're breathing shallow. Notice the
Yes.
difference when our body is hot and when it feels comfortable. So contrast is part of how we can move forward with somatic awareness in a way where we're tracking what's happening in a way that allows us to develop our intuition about what is needed next. Because no meditation master is going to know you better than you know yourself.
So true. Yes.
And so we have to develop our own ability to tune into what's actually happening right now and what do I need. So part of the challenge of all of this, obviously, is that it's layered. And so,
Mm-hmm.
let me just give you an example. I remember when I was a nun in the monastery and something would happen and all of a sudden I was knocked into a younger part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be walking and something would happen and I would just be, and having this immediate kind of regression and I was very young. So until I kind of cottoned on to what was happening, I would try to bring the tools that I knew as an adult and as a meditation teacher
Mm-hmm.
to what was happening. And I could be in these states for days, for weeks, and be nothing resolved. But when I could learn that I was in a younger part and then bring attention to myself as would be appropriate at that age,
Right.
then things could shift very quickly. So
Yes.
I came from a family where there wasn't a healthy relationship with anger. So for me, anger was complicated and I couldn't deal with it very well. So if I was like 3 and feeling angry, then I would sing songs about walking around the forest, hitting bunnies over the head with a frying pan.
It's a way to release your anger.
Which is a 3-year-old appropriate way to do it, And
Yeah.
so, and then in like 10 minutes, I was back into the coherence of my normal operating self and then could work with it with the tools that I normally had access to. But if I didn't understand what was going
Mm-hmm.
on and I was like shoving onto this little person all these adult concepts and tools,
Mm-hmm.
it would take forever for it to shift.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the skill is actually being incredibly attuned about what is actually, not what I think is happening,
Right.
what is actually happening right now and what is needed. So a 2-year-old needs 2-year-old appropriate language and tools and metaphors and ways of practicing. You can't
Mm-hmm.
ask a 2-year-old to go sit by themselves in the room and meditate alone. That's not an
Right.
appropriate response.
Right. I mean, what you're describing is really some of the inner child work, which I have done as well. And it's interesting because the little Lisa, like between the ages of birth to like 11 or 12, I've already worked with her and she's had a voice and she's had her say. It's teenage Lisa that's really I'm still working with. She really kicks it up. She really had much more of the abuse than the little Lisa, but I can tell when she's kicking up. I can feel it. I can feel it. And there's something going on. And so, what you're describing too is we need to be curious and not judgmental with ourselves and just go, why do I feel this way? Why am I thinking this way? You know, ask yourself these questions very gently. Because think about it. If you and I were having this conversation, I would ask you very nicely. I wouldn't be like, how could you think like that? What are you doing? I'd be like, really? Well, tell me more. Be curious with yourself. Be very gentle with yourself.
And also, like, with anger, just for example, with anger, there tends to be two kind of patterns. One pattern is that we explode, and that, in the explosive pattern, we have a really hard time feeling anger and we want to kind of discharge it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
The other kind of anger, which was more the kind that I had, which is that we stuff it. We're afraid to
Yeah.
experience it. We have no capacity to verbalize or vocalize or express it.
Or we're allowed to.
Right. Or we're punished if we do. And so
Yes.
then we have where we go back and forth from one to the other. So I was in Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for 2 years on my dear friend's farm, caretaking his dear friend's farm. And in Hawaii, there's an endless supply of coconuts. And on a garden, there was a machete. So it was a deliberate practice to massacre the coconuts. I didn't open them. I massacred. I murdered them. For 2 years, I murdered coconuts, and it was worth its weight in gold. Like,
I'm jealous. I'm jealous, honestly. That sounds like fun.
and then I would open the coconuts, and then there's delicious coconut meat. And so then I would
Yes.
make these yummy, 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 yummy things so that everything about it was yes. There was the yes of doing it. There was the yes of the result of how it felt in my body. There was
Mm-hmm.
the yes of how yummy the food I could make from it afterwards. It was yes. So my friend Bert, I love Bert. He said to me, I've had people help with the gardening for 40 years. Nobody has done that with the coconut. They open 3 coconuts and then it's very tiring and they don't want to do it anymore. I said, yeah, but they don't understand this practice.
I'm letting out a lot of anger, a lot of years of anger. I'm releasing. But I love how you made something beautiful out of it.
That's right. And so we can trust ourselves.
Yes.
I wasn't hurting myself. I wasn't hurting anybody. Opening a coconut is, contextually appropriate. Nobody got scared.
Yes. It was safe. It was a safe place for you to release.
Right. And there was, some stuff that was pent up. And so then I just let it
Yeah.
rip. I just let it rip. But it took a long time for me to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember the first time when I was experiencing just just rage. And I was terrified. I was in a Swiss monastery. It was the winter time. It was minus 15 degrees outside. It was like 10 o'clock at night. I walked a mile away from the monastery and I took all of my things with me so that I could make a sacred circle and do these prayers and make these offerings. And so I did. I did all these things. And basically what I did was, I threw some rocks and I swore. And I was like kind of astounded that I wasn't swallowed by the earth, like that it was actually that I survived that, you know?
And probably felt better.
I felt hugely better, but
Yeah.
the terror
Mm-hmm.
was not.
The fear is just so embedded.
It was huge. And so I needed all of that. I needed to walk a mile away. It needed to be at night. It needed to be sure that nobody would hear me. I needed to make a sacred ceremony. I needed to say, may this be for the benefit of all beings,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't trust that if I just did it, I would be safe.
Mm. So our listeners who have dealt with the abuse that happens in church or religious abuse, what would you say? I mean, some people don't even realize, it's just like with abuse. Some people don't even realize they were abused. They don't realize because it's their normal. But what would you say to them? What would be a first step for them when they're sitting here, they're listening to you like, okay, there's something to this, and I think I'm dealing with this. What would be a recommendation you would have for their first step?
First of all, gentle. Just
Mhm.
be incredibly kind and gentle. There's no pressure. There's no need to do anything, but just listen. If there's some resonance, then just be curious about that. And then the next step is then to begin to start finding out, are there places where you don't feel comfortable or safe in yourself when you're in your context where there might be abuse that's going on? And if so, how is it shaping up? Is it because it's like verbal degradation? Is there exploitation with money or with labor? Is there some kind of an
Mm.
ideology where you don't belong as much as somebody else belongs? Is there a way in which there's the sense of you being insufficient is magnified rather than reduced? Is there a way in which something that doesn't make logical sense to you in most contexts you accept there because the doctrine says that you need to? Just curiosity, but with an
Yeah.
incredible amount of tenderness.
Yes, because I know it's interesting that we're having this subject today because some of the stuff that I've been reflecting on the last couple of days, and, there's I know for me, I love God. I love God. I love worship. There were some things about church I really loved, but there was always this little check in me that just did not 100% sit well in the church. Excuse me. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. And of course, then I start pulling myself away like, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm not jumping in with everything like everybody else I see around me. And I see the women doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, there's just something. And so for years, I used to think it was me. What I've learned over time is I really need to listen to my intuition. It has 100% always been right. I don't always have the answer as to why I'm having that feeling. But every time I've had that feeling and I have just been patient and paused and watched and waited, it's been right every time. So that's what I'm telling the listeners, that you need to start trusting yourself. And like you say, if there's something in you that doesn't feel quite right, that doesn't look right or maybe sound right, be curious.
Right. So, for people who are meditators or for people who are just interested in the integrated meditation program, I'm doing free drop in sessions. I don't know that they're quite on the website just yet, but if you go to the integrated meditation program on the Awakening Truth website, you can sign up for the free drop in sessions to find out more about this program. Because for me, that work of being able to change those baseline patterns about
Yes.
whether I felt okay enough was a game changer in terms of doing a whole nother level of work of understanding what happened and why it was so complicated and why it was so hard to recover from.
It's like you changed your identity. It's like you discovered who you were instead of who you were trying to be. At least that was for me. Like I was definitely I had my heart in it, but of course there were things that I did because I knew it was the right thing to do.
Well, that I don't actually still have a coherent narrative about that piece, in terms of what part of my identity got so creamed. Alls I know is that
Mm.
it took 15 years for me once I left the difficulty for me to have a clear picture of some of the reasons why it was so
Yeah,
damaged and to come into a place where it doesn't feel like I've got phosphorus burning me to the core or every time I talk about it, my system, my nervous system just gets totally agitated. Or,
yeah.
for years, I would see ochre color robes and I would have a full-blown trauma response,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh, yeah.
it could be with people who had nothing to do with me or the
Mhm.
story, or
Mhm.
just, sitting on my cushion and chanting, it would cause a panic attack or, just things like that. So I had to find my way back into like what makes sense to me and how am I like who am I? What am I identified with? And where was the harm? Like was the harm in the things that I believe in or was the harm in the
Yeah.
distortions that people brought to how they
Yeah.
what I believed in needed to be lived out?
Yeah. That's you just nailed it because I spent 10 years deconstructing and that is exactly what I was dealing with. What is real and what is man, right? I'm not saying just men, but man-made, people-made, human-made. I had to seriously go through that and sort that, and it is really complicated. It is really difficult. Um, there were a lot of emotions that came out
Yes,
going through
and
that.
I mean, and I completely resonate. And so for me, okay, there's a couple of things. As a Buddhist nun, we are totally dependent on support for our livelihood. We don't have money. We don't have a bank account. We don't get money. We get food and we get things to live, but we don't get money. And so the monastery culture then supports us with those basic requisites. So we are dependent on the thing that is supporting us. So what I discovered in that context, for me, this might not be true for everybody, but for me, was this, that on some level I could name cognitively that there were things that were happening that were not in accordance with what felt right, but I couldn't actually track the harm of what was happening
Oh.
because I was dependent upon the thing that was supporting me,
Mm-hmm.
and because I was so deeply committed and identified that I was in a conflict between speaking the truth and not wanting people to lose faith in the thing that was so important.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I can relate to that. That's why for years, I kept my mouth shut because what I do, this is for me. The decision that I made of not going to church, but my relationship with God, that is for me. It is not something I'm putting out there as that's what everybody needs to do at all. Because the last thing I want to do is I don't want to trip anybody up on their walk, whatever that is. If they're curious and they want to ask me, I'm happy to share. But the last thing I want to do is cause someone else to stumble or be responsible for that.
So, I was just looking through some things that I had written. And so when I went to the monastery, a month after I arrived, I write a 10-page letter to my family and friends. And I say, it is completely outrageous that there are these outdated patriarchal structures and that there isn't equality with the women. This is 1 month after arriving. So that the information on some level was present.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it wasn't until I actually left my dependency on the system and I was
Mm-hmm.
an independent monastic that I had more capacity to track the harm that had happened. And furthermore, even while I was an independent monastic, because I was still a monastic in my situation, I had to decide to leave monasticism and return to civilian life before there was another layer of being able to track the harm of what had actually happened. Because my identification with being a nun obscured my ability to see,
Mm-hmm.
the name, and to articulate the harm of what I was in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That is, you just nailed it. That's exactly what happens.
So, my mom and my dad, they were
Wow.
they were divorced from the time I was 4. Both of them came to the monastery separately, when I first arrived, and both of them said, "I can't imagine a better place in the whole world for you to live." Okay? Fast forward, after 28 years of being an Anagarika Siladharana bhikkhuni, I said, "So, Mom, what's it like watching me disrobe?" She says, "It's like watching somebody come out of an abusive relationship."
What? They didn't ever try to talk you out of this, or did they?
Well, I think no, they didn't try to talk
Because
me.
they didn't know. They didn't know that they didn't know. They
Yeah,
found out when you shared with them, so they
yeah,
wouldn't have known.
yeah.
Oh, oh, wow. Okay, so I have one question I like to share, or I like to ask, not share. I like to ask all my guests, and that is, what would you like to leave our listeners with?
I would like to leave you with the real knowledge that you matter,
Mm,
that you are a precious being in this world,
yes.
that your life is a gift, that you are a gift, and that in that you take impeccable care of yourself in everything that you do, and see and check if what you're doing is congruent with the gift that you are.
That's beautiful. And share with our listeners again how they could reach out to you if they wanted to, and then your free meditation class as well.
So, awakeningtruth.org is the name of the website. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube as Amma Thanasanti. I'm on Instagram as Awakening Truth. The integrated meditation program has a page on the Awakening Truth website. We're now accepting applications for the next cohort, and we will be having free drop-in sessions that you'll be able to register from that website. Integrated meditation program, drop-in sessions, and I don't believe they're on the website this minute, but they will be in the next little while.
So by the time this is released, then they should be on the website. Excellent.
And I should be able to give you a link for it.
Okay, great. Excellent. Well, we'll have that in the show notes, so it'll be real easy for everybody to reach out to you. And I want to thank you for sharing your story. It's funny because we had a completely different direction we were going, but we got to talk and it's like, oh, I wanted to hear about it and I know you wanted to share. You wanted to get it out there. So I think we did a really great job and I want to thank you for sharing.
And thank you for your openness, your honesty, your willingness to shift on a dime, and just how important this stuff is to talk about.
And that's what it boils down to, is what is important to get out there, not what I want, but what's important to get out there. And as you were talking, it was like I was ready to jump out of my chair because I've been looking for stuff like this to share, because this is a whole nother area of abuse that needs to be delved into, is the religious abuse. So thank you.